Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of that culture curve. That's what we're doing each and every day here on the WDW Pro channel. And if you like that sort of thing, you might consider clicking the like button, share it, subscribe to us, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about that notification bell. Joining us for the very first time is the newest writer over at thatparkplace.com, Martin Stone. And Martin, it's a pleasure and honor to have you. You've been writing on topics concerning censorship, as well as on sort of how the new strategy is. There are various people groups who, for whatever reason, they have come up with the idea that it's okay to take works of art, works of literature, and to modify those to their own liking and to revise them into something that is more palatable to whatever it is that they believe. So can you walk us through what this new phenomenon is that you're seeing? Tell us some examples and why it is so nefarious in your opinion.
Well, that's a big question. There's a lot to unpack there.
Three big questions, eh?
Yeah. So I will say I don't think it's a new phenomenon. It's the more elegant phenomenon. So if you look back like deep into art history, you'll see things where people will conquer another people, and they'll take their iconography, turn it upside down, like literally turn it upside down, and put that inverted iconography into their own. Like
Absolutely.
one example is where the Minoans had a pillar that appeared often in their artwork. And when the Mycenaeans conquered them, you start to see that pillar upside down in Mycenaean reliefs and friezes and things like that. So taking from other people, making it your own, and perverting it is a deeply human thing.
I'm just mulling that over in my head for a moment. I think it's worth a pause there to think on that. It seems to me that that's probably because art is difficult to produce, very difficult to produce, especially, the farther you go into something that we can all qualify as very good art, the less people that can do that. And so when you take over a people group, or when you want to take over a people group, when you want to steal from others and claim it as your own, it seems to me that since it's so difficult to produce great art, that when you find it in those that you cannot reach their level, the easy way to have your own is to just simply take what they have done, since it already exists as great art, and then pervert it by sort of layering over that with whatever abilities you have. Does that sound right? And I think we've seen that in pop culture for the last, this has been a new thing where people take existing franchises, existing shows, and then they repurpose it for whatever they want. But it's clear there's a strong demarcation where you can tell where the legacy excellence stops and the new, often what we would call woke, but postmodern, nihilistic, whatever you want to say, but where this new, much lower quality overlay begins.
Oh, absolutely. When you take without adding, you're kind of robbing everybody, aren't you?
Sure.
And like Tolkien talked about, the dark can't create; it can only change, destroy. And I think we see that in the way we are as people. So like let's say you got the woke crowd, and let's imagine a creative who grew up in Middle America and couldn't wait to get out. They get out to the coast, and they meet all the people that they wish they could have known growing up, and they've been doing their writing. They're trying to hone their craft, and they've got a message that they want to get out there. But the message that they have has to come through their toolbox of imagery, right? And let's say this woke guy had a really conservative Christian upbringing. Well, he knows conservative Christian iconography, but he is rebelling against it. So he takes those things.
Well, and Martin, let's pause there. Let me say this. So Christian iconography and Christian cultural symbols permeate all of American life. And it's always impressive to me, the things that we forsake as being symbolic in any way to Judeo-Christian origins. And it just takes a little bit of undigging, and you find that, oh, well, that's what this is. It is deeply intertwined in the American experience, such that whether you identify as a believer or a non-believer, much of the stuff that we do each day is derived from, those originating beliefs that were such a part of our culture until very, very recently.
Right. And, even some atheists like Dawkins, for instance, believes that, or I've heard him at least say, I don't know if he still believes this, that the Bible as literature should be taught to people because it's the foundational text of Western civilization. And so if we can't talk to each other in our foundational texts, how do we grow? Well, you make new foundational texts.
I don't know if you've paid attention to, there was a Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson conversation where the proposition put forth was that the Bible is integral to understanding not only Western civilization, but also understanding truth. And the basis for that was essentially that the Bible was that which sent forth literacy into the world. And, it's very difficult to separate out articulated truth from literacy. You have to be able to manage ideas into some sort of formula, and that formula tends to be communication, and communication tends to be that which is able to be put forth into words, either in text or not.
Right.
And so the argument there was that the Bible is so integral to Western civilization, and perhaps more, that you really can't even get at how it is that we came forth as a civilization to identify that which is right and wrong, our value systems, all of these things, without at least having a cursory understanding of the Bible. So I fully agree with you. Whether or not someone is a believer, they should definitely, and I guess I agree with Dawkins in that respect, we should definitely understand one of the most important, and I wouldn't call the Bible I wouldn't call it a text, because it's a collection of many texts. So in that
true
way, it's more of a corpus of fundamental text to a lot.
Yeah. Well, and we could take that even back to the iconography we're talking about. And, I was kind of talking about, the prototypical woke person and them trying to take on these things that they don't really understand. Because how many of us really understand our world when we're 18 years old and we leave home?
Well, so I don't understand this world. So I mean, let's just identify that we are all tremendously stupid.
Yes.
And the way that you know that, and we don't realize that when we're teenagers, like what you're talking about. And one of the reasons we don't know that is because our brain develops into the adult form, or it's transitioning into that way, and we suddenly are knowledgeable in ways that we were not before. And it doesn't strike us that everybody else around us who is an adult has already had this phenomenon occur. And so that creates that egotism that teenagers are so notorious for, where they suddenly think they understand everything because they understand a little bit more than they did the day before.
Right.
Now, to understand what I'm saying when I say that we are incredibly ignorant people, no matter who you are. You can be the most intelligent astrophysicist in the world. You can be the greatest neurosurgeon there is. But we all have a very limited spectrum of domain that we can be experts in. And part of that's because we have a time constraint. Part of that's because we have a focus constraint. And so we all have to become, ideally, experts in a very small and specific area. But let's say that you are an average person and you're asked, do you understand how cars work? Well, the average person is likely to respond to that and say, oh, yes, of course, I know how cars work. But the truth is that we all understand how cars work until our car is broken down on the side of the road. And we don't understand the first thing about cars. Because if we did, the car wouldn't be broken down on the side of the road. And you can do that with any number of things. All you have to do is pass through a certain amount of resolution, and you quickly discover that you know almost nothing about it. There's the famous analogy about the pencil. And you say, well, do you understand your pencil? And you say, well, of course I understand my pencil. You know, the eraser, I get that, the wood, the lead, etc. I know how to write with it, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody says, well, where was that pencil manufactured? You know, what does that matter? Okay, well, how many atoms are in the pencil? Oh, come on. You know, oh, come on comes from the fact that you know the things you need to know in order to function in the world to whatever level it is that you need to. But the moment that you go beyond that, you tend to know almost nothing about the domains that escape you.
Right. And we can all be excused for that because it's a giant, magnificent universe. How could we possibly touch the hem of it?
Well, I'm fully with you. But so to go back to what you were saying, you know, you take the individual who has just had the first discovery of you know, I'm getting a grasp of this world, and they assume that to mean that they have a full grasp of it.
Right.
You know, they can barely make their bed, but they believe that they can change the world. And so then they leave their small town home where they're a big fish in a small pond, and they go to somewhere very large. And as you were saying, they take the iconography that they're aware of, but which they probably are not fully appreciative of. And definitely they don't have the full understanding of it, unless that's specifically what they've been studying all their youth.
Right.
And then they go and use that to sort of build into this arrogance, this egotism that they've developed, which is, you know, it's a natural thing. And I think it's Piaget who speaks about is it the savior? No, it's the messianic stage of development, which is at the end of your teenage years, your early 20s, when you discover the great wrongs in the world and you attach to one of those to try to change it. So, you know, it's a common phenomenon that young people experience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of where, you know, again, the iconography thing, like metal. Is there anything more metal than an inverted cross? Well, except that the Pope's throne has an inverted cross because tradition tells us that Peter insisted to be crucified upside down because he wasn't worthy to be like Jesus. So is there anything less metal than the Pope? You know,
yeah. I'm with you. I'm following.
People just don't understand these symbols. So let's take our woke creative, and he gets a job at DC and he works his way up, and now he gets to write Superman. Okay. Superman's symbol is an American icon. It's evocative. It means something to people. And so
David Zaslav agrees with you, and we heard about that in the earnings call yesterday with Warner Brothers Discovery. So yes, you have people in high places agreeing with you on that one.
Right. And so anybody who wants to claim the mantle of Americanism wants Superman's logo. And if you want to change America, you want Superman to stand for what you stand for. And you know what? He always did. Because Superman's good and he's right, and you're good and right. So what you believe, well, obviously that's what Superman believes.
Sure. Now, okay, I'm with you on all of that. Talk to me about how, do you think that these people, when they go in and they change the value system, so you have to know that this person who comes in and they think that Superman believes what they believe because what they believe must be right by virtue of the fact that they're right. Because, you know, that's just part of the hubris of being young, I suppose, is that you're right. And so they take over whatever this is. It could be Captain America, it could be Superman, what have you. And these icons now have to agree with their belief systems. What do you think goes through the mind of a person who's making this change? Do they view the beliefs of these characters as they transition them to their own beliefs? Do they view that as a righteous endeavor that they're taking? Or do they view this as might is right? What's going on there?
You know, that's a great question. It's one I struggle with a lot because I hate to impugn motives and I hate to attribute motives to people because I don't know what's going on in their minds. Half the time, I don't know what's going on in my mind. So I can see somebody taking taking Superman and saying, I'm going to take him from these people. They don't deserve him. I can see that. But I can also see somebody saying, sure, Superman believed this back then, but we have a better understanding now, and we need to make a Superman for the modern audience. And of course, I'm the modern audience. People are, you know, we're all the audience, right? Each of us thinks so.
Sure.
A great writer probably is able to step outside of themselves and do what other people want to see. But you know, most writers are not great because most people aren't great. So I can see the theft side of it, but I can also see it's just the right thing to do now. We've grown past that.
And then if I understand you correctly, because you made a reference to Tolkien and you said that the dark cannot create, that darkness cannot create. And I get the metaphor there, because darkness is the absence of light. Light is that which reveals, and darkness is that which obscures. Darkness is not in of itself anything. It is the absence thereof. Is it your position that these people, for whatever reason, these people who want to change our beloved franchises and icons, is it your position that they cannot create new stuff that is highly motivating and enraptures us, and so they have to take these pre-existing symbols and modify them for their own purposes?
I think it takes a pretty mature person to do that, to create. And I think a lot of impassioned people are not mature.
Well, and it's hard to do, right? That's what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. It's very hard to make great art.
Mm-hmm.
So if your goal is to put your thumbprint on society, if that's the goal, and it's not necessarily creating great art because that's difficult, then the easiest way to do that is to take those things which have deep psychological resonance with the society, whether you understand why or how, and then mold it into what you want.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So look, you've got Twain on the board there that I can see.
Sure.
And I talked about him in that article. I very briefly talked about it. Mark Twain took a side character from Tom Sawyer, the character Huckleberry Finn, and made him the center of one of the great American epics. And Huckleberry Finn's journey down the Mississippi River changes Huck. And over the course of that journey, you see the development of the child to the man. Although, you know, he's still young. He's not a full-grown man, but you see Huck's relationship and understanding of Jim change.
Okay. Okay. Pause there, though, because you said something that we need to extrapolate. What do you mean that we see him go from a child to a man? What does that mean?
Well, so when Huckleberry Finn leaves his home, the urge is just to get away and have an adventure. But the farther he gets down the Mississippi, the more he sees, the more he's changed. And so in the end of that story, when Tom Sawyer shows up, Tom has not changed. Tom is still the rascal he always was in their hometown, but Huck is different now. And Tom just wants to have his same adventures and steal his aunt's silverware and then replace it so she loses track of how many there were and thinks she's going crazy. But Huck's not interested in that stuff anymore. Huck's a different person now because
so he's become more conscious, you might say.
Right. But Twain, over the course of that growth, has Huck as a man of his time, a boy of his time. And so he uses language that is inexcusable today. But it's appropriate for the story because it's appropriate for the time. And even though Huck starts out with a servile view of Jim, their relationship changes over the course of that story. Good art does that. Good art changes the writer, it changes the characters, and it changes the reader, the viewer, the listener.
Well, Martin, okay, so you bring up an important point here too. So one of the things that we're seeing from this this new wave of let's just say they're the postmodernists, right? They question everything. There is no objective truth. That's why we say it's my truth, right? Because objectivity is no longer real. The problem with that is that pragmatically, if you operate in a world where there is no objective truth, then you never get from point A to point B on anything. So you have to then you put at rest or you put at bay objectivity only when that suits you.
Right.
In my opinion, right? I'll give you an example. If you were to have someone come and offer to replace the shingles on your roof, and they said to you, well, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to remove your roof and we're going to put an inverted roof on your structure, right? It's going to be completely the opposite. Instead of having the roof go up, it's going to go down. And you might say to them, well, you know, that won't work because water will then run down into the roof, into the lowest point and destroy the building. I mean, this just won't work. Nobody sane would ever say, oh, well, I'm sorry. That is the roofer's truth. And there is no absolute truth. It's just his truth versus your truth, because that's stupid. But we use that whenever it suits us in certain arguments. But what I'm seeing from these postmodernists is that they take characters, and if the character fits a certain mold, they are terrified of having that character have any sort of arc. They have to start out with a high degree of perfection. And so I think that's actually what you're getting at, is that it offends them to take a character who is deeply flawed and then watch them improve over time. It offends them that certain types of people, which by the way, in reality is all people, start off from a point that is less than it could be, and that we then grow, because that contravenes their absolute point that you should be loved just as you are. You're all that you ever need to be, and that the world must accept you exactly the way that you come to it on any given day.
Absolutely. Yeah. We all, none of us act as if there is my truth. We all act as if there are certain concrete rules or certain concrete realities in the world, and that we can choose to do things that will affect them. That's how we actually live. So whether or not you're a determinist, whether or not you're a postmodernist, everybody acts as if their choices matter in their own lives. But we don't want to, no, I say we don't want our art. I do want my art to reflect that. I want my art to have complex people who I don't necessarily agree with making decisions that maybe I don't agree with, having consequences, growing, developing, changing. But if you've got a point to make and your point is the most important thing, then those characters and their growth are not going to be as important to you, and they're not going to be as compelling.
Well, so you brought up determinists, and I kind of chuckled to myself. I don't know if the mic caught it, but I was thinking about Sam Harris, because Sam Harris in the last 24 hours has put out something utterly stupid, and you know, people have begun to sort of bail from Sam Harris. He was one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, and seemed to be highly intellectual, very smart. But then over the last few years, he's been wrong on a lot of things that were very important. And so then he's devolved into, you know, trying to make excuses for that. And most of those excuses come down to that the people who listen to him and read his stuff and everyone else are just too stupid to rise to his intellectual level. And so what was funny to me about that, as you were talking about determinists, is whenever I see what Sam Harris has put out that puts him in a worse light than before, I always kind of laugh, because I think, well, you know, he's a determinist. He can't help it. It was always preordained, you know? Yeah. And the thing about so the postmodernists, at least I can play ball with them. The determinists, right? The ones who say, well, everything is just a consequence of something before. There is no free will. There is no agency in the world. The problem with that is they don't act as if that's true at all. And so what's so funny about that is that they say that, and then they go to a movie and they get excited and cheer for a hero who makes the right choices to win the day. And it's like, pick one, man. Come on.
Yeah. Well, we could, you and I, it sounds like, because this is the first time we've ever talked, but it sounds like you and I could talk about this stuff forever. Because, like, so Sam Harris as an atheist means he is a materialist, and I don't see how you could be a materialist and not a determinist if all that there is the material world.
Well, I think he's a determinist. I think he said that. I mean, he doesn't think there's any kind of free will. The problem that I have.
Well, I'm saying if you're a materialist,
right?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we'll save that for another day. That gets pretty deep. But so what I would say though is that if you are a determinist, and that's what's some of these people, like what we're talking about, these young people who go out and they want to take on creating new art out of the old art that already exists, and they want to fundamentally change the values that are held within it. They go with these kind of notions that we're talking about, right?
Right.
For example, determinism, that everything has already been preordained by the fact that the universe is made of math, and there is no, if there is random chance, it's not impacted by any kind of thing called free will, because you are just, you're just engineering inside that skull of yours. And free will and consciousness are all illusions. Well, the problem with that is, why would you care at all about entertainment whatsoever? And yet they seem to enjoy entertainment just like the rest of us.
Right.
But entertainment seems to me to be something that is, by its nature, it requires that agency and consciousness produced it, that free will produced it. Otherwise, it has no value other than, I guess, what you ignorantly were preordained to believe as some sort of giant, some giant illusion that you bought into of no will of your own.
Right.
And then you know what else, Martin? What that does to a true believer of that, if you're actually a true believer of that, why would you ever get the impetus to do anything? Because you can always just say, well, it was preordained that I lay here in my squalor and never move forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the only way I could see somebody motivating themselves out of that is, I like to feel good, so I'm going to make sure I feel good, and that's the end of life. That's the purpose, the goal, to feel good.
Right. Well, that would be hedonism.
Yeah. Or Epicureanism.
Sure. All right. So talk to me real quick about these. What are you seeing right now in terms of art that is significant, that should not be edited, that should not be modified, that should not be changed, that is in whatever way we want to declare it sacred? What's out there that's being altered that should not?
So we got the thing with Roald Dahl going on, where his rights holders have decided some subtle changes, some not so subtle changes, need to be made to his works to reflect the modern audience. One of the things I thought was really funny about that was Matilda, instead of reading Joseph Conrad, now reads Jane Austen. I mean, you would think there's a certain, I don't know, feminist vibe that would say, we don't want to pigeonhole her into just girl literature.
Well, I think what's happening here is that there is an addiction to erasing, and they just say to hell with it when the question is, should we tear this down? Should we destroy it? Should we remove it? Should we modify it? I mean, they're ravenous, right? There's a ravenous movement across society. And so they've thrown logic to the wind, and they just say, let's replace it all.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so beyond Dahl, I talked about Twain in that article. Obviously, Twain, since at least the 90s, people have been trying to edit his work to take out the racist language. And I get that. I understand why people would want to do that. When I was a kid, my parents had got me like a children's set of literature, and it was a lot of classic novels, but in digestible forms for like upper elementary, lower middle school or something like that. And so there were things that I thought I read that I didn't read. I thought I read The Three Musketeers. And then when I was a grown man, I went and got a copy of the Three Musketeers, and it's like 50 times the size of the kids edition I read. And it's so much more complicated and layered and interesting. And if you cut up Twain to take away the people being people of their own time, have you really read Twain? Have you seen the growth of those people? If Huck doesn't treat Jim as a slave at the beginning, is it so important how he treats him at the end?
Exactly. Because that narrows the journey significantly.
Right. It makes it just a geographical journey, not a spiritual journey.
Right, which it's supposed to be both.
Right. And the geography is sort of a metaphor.
What's the end game of this? What are these people after who they want to, they want to get rid of all that offends them? What's their end game?
I think you got a bunch of end games at play. I think there are some people who are just reactionary and they don't have an end game. They just want to see the change. Then you've got people, and I made this reference in the I don't know, op-ed article about Splash Mountain, that some people want to usher in a heaven on earth. And to usher that in, you have to be changed. Because you can't come into their heaven the way you are.
Right. Well, I'm with you on that. I see what you're saying. Yes.
Right. And the Splash Mountain one is particularly funny because the Disney Corporation has decided that, okay, well, first of all, they decided this movie that we won't release, and we haven't allowed anybody to see it since the early 70s. We're going to make a theme park attraction around it.
Well, okay. So that was actually, so that you could have watched Song of the South easily up until about 91, 92.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, it was out on VHS. It was available. And you can still find it to some degree, but it's very difficult, and they certainly don't release it now.
Right. Okay, so I'm wrong on that then. But still, it's something that made Disney cringe that they once did this thing. But they make the theme park ride. And that was around the time that, America was having a cultural reawakening. We'd won the Cold War. Now we're going to take care of some stuff at home. One of the things we need to take care of is our past mistakes on racial issues. And you know what? We've got some stuff that we did wrong. Absolutely. No doubt about it. Now you fast forward a few years, and for some reason, Splash Mountain just has to go, and it has to go now, and it has to go so quickly that we don't really have a plan to replace it. And my understanding is what they're replacing it with is low budget. Like practically no budget to remake this thing. It's not going to be the world of animatronic characters that everybody enjoyed in this. And I really do think it was some of the best animatronic work they had done to date. And I think I remember as a kid seeing they bragged about how there were more animatronic characters on this ride than any other attraction they'd ever done.
Sure. I mean, it's a phenomenal attraction. Mm-hmm. And you're right. They are replacing it with something that's low budget, that's ahistorical, that is very problematic. It takes a real place from a real time where there are real slaves buried, and it paints over it with a Disney-style brush where a woman of color, let's say, can rise up in that time period and be so wealthy that she owns a salt dome, and you ride through a geographical place which is not at all representative of Louisiana. And all of this is so messy because you're right. They very quickly said, here's what we're going to do, but they had no game plan on how to do it.
Right. And so let's tie another article I wrote into this. The article about Elsa. And I wrote an article about Elsa and Anna and how if you extend the metaphors that people think are present there, the whole story breaks down into something very, very dark. When you try to change these icons and characters and make them your own, and you don't really think through the metaphors you're using, you come up with stupid things, and everything breaks down and nothing makes any sense. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Now, I do think that we need to bring this to a close, and then we can return and have a more thorough conversation about this again. Sure. This is all very fascinating, and I think that there's a lot more to dig through in this, especially for those listeners who are interested in sort of the basis for what all we're seeing. What's the deep psychological reasoning that we see these movements that want to take the things that you love and transform them into something else? You know, you might think of Velma as an example. You can think of Star Wars. You can see what they're doing with Marvel right now. Any number of properties out there that you love that are being shifted into something that they were never meant to be. But I think, listening to our conversation right now, and you tell me if you think this is right, the thread that I hear throughout all of the things we're discussing is that it would be far better if, rather than trying to subvert the art that exists and which already functioned very well, if we all attempted to be very good at creating our own art, that would at least be a start, right? That would at least be a start to ending some of this, where we take that which is very beautiful and then we twist it to our own wants and our own desires.
You know, I agree. I think that if people want to tell their own story, nobody has a problem with that. I might not want to listen to your story, but if you're crafting new places and times, I'm not going to stand in your way. That's your story, and I don't have to listen to it if I don't want to, or I can listen and you know, get out at some point. But if you're taking the things that we all as a community loved together and trying to make that yours and take other people away from, or take it away from other people, well, that's where you get in this culture war. If I have a story that I want to tell and I make my own characters, places, settings, themes, people can buy into that, or they might not, and it'll be forgotten. But if I take Superman, Batman, if I take, I don't know, Pocahontas, and put in the themes that I want, that were not there before, or I see them only subtextually, that's kind of stealing from other people. And I can see why they would have a knee-jerk reaction to it. Absolutely. And I think we're seeing that all over our world. You know, making new things is hard. And it's much easier when there's no audience for our new things to blame the audience. We also see that, right? We saw that with Pixar. And it's much easier to simply go back to things that have been successful before and change them, rather than to try to produce something brand new that fits our own ideas and convince people to follow along with that instead. So, Martin, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope that people will tune into thatparkplace.com and read your articles, check out the things that you have to say. You're thinking at a very deep level, and I think it's one that a lot of people are very hungry for, is to have these types of deep conversations. So, Martin Stone, thank you for being aboard. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.